Good morning. I am Sally Durstein. I lead our team here at the Family Business Center, and it's great to see familiar faces and also some new faces. I would like to welcome you to the launch of our 2023 Forum Series. So glad you are here. And I'd like to start by introducing members of my team who can be here this morning. We have Jen Huntsberger. She's our Learning Community Coordinator. You've been getting lots of emails from her. And we have Henry Landis, our founder, Senior Family Business Advisor. And we have Anna. Anna, can you show your face in here? Anna Walter is our Client Coordinator, and she's new. This is the first time here, so welcome, Anna, and thank you to you. If you want to see other members of our team, there's a flyer in front of you that has the rest of our team on it. Want to give a huge thank you to members of our advisory network. You can see them represented on the slide here, or if you could just stand or wave your hands, we'd like to give you a huge thank you because you make these events possible, and you are selected because of your competence and your ability to collaborate. So important. I'd like to give a special welcome to a new advisory network member, and that is Anthony Mongaluzzo from PCS. If you could stand, Anthony. It's an interesting story to the founding of his company. If you want to hear it, you can also visit the breakout that Anthony's going to be doing along with Kevin Fox from Capstone. And is Anthony Ward here? Not yet. Oh, and there's Anthony Ward, also from PCS. So these are IT solution people, very important people to have on your team. And if you're interested, Anthony brought his tech tank. It's his mobile office, and it is really cool. We got to visit at our last meeting. So after the meeting, don't go out now, but after the meeting, you're welcome to check it out. So, and also Whitepenny will be leading one of our members. They'll be leading most of the presentation this morning. So, Jen?
So we want to welcome some new members to our learning community. Sarah Coveney, I think I saw Ann Angelucci. Sarah's just coming in. Welcome, Sarah. And Ann Angelucci. And they are Premier Payroll Services. President and Vice President, and then also Jeff Nisley from Jubilee Farm. There you are, Jubilee Farms, Jubilee Dairy. That's Dauphin County, New Jersey. So welcome. And then Sam Pipitone from F&S Fresh, and I met him this morning. So they are in Vineland, New Jersey. And then also we want to welcome a guest, Charlotte Flynn from Flynn O'Hara Uniforms. So thank you for coming today and being our guest. And we hope that you all choose to join our learning community, and I will be giving you more emails when you leave here today.
So our theme this year is honoring the many voices of enterprising families. And indeed, there are many voices in a family business on many different mountains, which we'll talk about in a minute. And our book, you should have all received, if you're a member, our theme book, which is the Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook. We love this book. We wish we would have written it. It's very much our philosophy in there, and it focuses really on the power and the responsibilities of ownership. Now, they refer to the 4 rooms, and we like it. We refer to the 5 mountains. We actually add an advisory mountain. So encourage you to read this book. We're using it in our peer groups and in our consulting engagements. If you have read it, are some of you reading it already? Yeah? All right. Encourage you to read that. So, and just the many voices. These are some of the voices you will be hearing in our upcoming programs. We're not going to go through that now, but that is on your table if you want to take that home. So just if you're here today, family businesses, most of you are on 2 or more mountains. We have several of you that are on 4 of the mountains. That means you're a family member, a shareholder, you're in management, you're on the board. Let's see. I know Brandon, you're on 4 mountains. Where's Brandon? Brandon McFall from LTI. We got Dan. Where's Dan? From Dan McIntyre. Oh, right there. And then let's see, who else? David Oliver. And I think there's one more of you that are on 4 mountains. But there's a lot of complexity going on. So families that are successful over the generation work at developing these 5 teams. And many of you know about the 5 mountains. We can focus on that on another meeting.
Okay, so as per your agenda, which is also on your table, we will break at 9:25-ish. Bathrooms are where you came in. If you go out the same way, there are bathrooms there. And then help yourself. We've got lots of food. Help yourself throughout them. Don't be shy. Get up during the presentation. Get coffee, drinks are in the back, food here. And then question and answer and guided table talk is around 9:45. And then we'll go to the breakouts at 10:20. And then we'll announce where and how you get to those.
So, we'd like to introduce John Kofsky and Travis Coley from Whitepenny. They will be leading our discussion on brand strategy. And we are so delighted because we are also, come on up, guys. We're also in the process of updating our strategy and our messaging, and they've been of great help to us so far. So, stay tuned on our end as well. So take it away, guys.
You could. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? John Kofsky, co-founder, creative director of Whitepenny, joined by Travis Coley and two of our dear friends from the company Zeramis, Carol Subernardo and Jim Locascio, that we're going to have a conversation with today. Thought maybe we could just start briefly. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things, but when we talk about brand, you're going to hear us use the word brand a lot. Love to get a sense of what does everybody think of when we say brand? And for the purposes of this today too, we're looking for this to be a conversation. We're gonna have a conversation with Jim and Carol Sue. We'd love you to engage in that conversation. But just kind of high level, when I say brand, what comes to mind for everybody? What do you think of? What's the first thing that pops into your head when we say brand?
Reputation.
Reputation.
Nike.
Nike? Yeah. Anybody else? Apple. So you think of brands. You think of actually like big brands, what that means. Yeah. Awesome. You flip to that first one, Trev? So what we talk a lot about when we think about brand is like what are the parts that constitute a brand? What makes up a brand? And what we often find is when we're talking about brand, kind of have these different pieces. People jump to the last one. The assets, the things. They think of your visual representation of the brand. They think of a logo, they think of a tagline, they think of like how a brand shows up in the market. What we have found is that the conversation that we want to have and that we've been having with most of our clients is actually around bucket two. So if I just break these down, first thing being purpose, defining your mission and reason for being. Why do you exist, right? Asking yourself the question, what are we doing? Why did we start this business? What is it about? What are we trying to do? The second piece, position. How are you uniquely positioned in the market? When we think of brand, that is actually the core of every conversation we have. What is it that you do that really makes you unique in your market? On top of that, then is the message itself. How do you articulate your brand story and value? How are you putting that message out into the market? Followed by actions. What are the things, the actual things that you do as a company that back up and build on that brand position? We hear clients all the time talk about being service focused. We're really committed to service, and we say to them, what do you do? Tell us something, tell us a story that shows that kind of puts that into action. Sometimes they don't have that story. Our job is to say, let's make sure that you have actions that back up every step in that process of your brand. And then the last one being, okay, now put it into the market, what does it look like? If you're a boutique powerhouse company, do you look that way? Are we making sure that the assets and the brand style guide track with that positioning strategy? But for the conversation today, we want to focus on, number two, how are you uniquely positioned in your market? So Travis, do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of idea of differentiation? And then we're going to just have a conversation with our friends here about how they've built this business over the last decades and how they've really leveraged what makes them unique to kind of define the brand that is Zeramis.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was driving over today, and as many of you, I'm flipping through the dials, ended up on CNBC and was just getting caught up on the markets. And the conversation drifted towards where are we in the economy today and how is it different from where we were even 5-10 years ago as it relates to macroeconomic cycles. And the conversation basically was saying, hey, listen, when everything's up and to the right, it's all about lead gen, demand, and top of funnel in terms of how do we attract customers. We've hit a big reset through COVID and over the last 3 or 4 years, which is now really focusing on profitability, cash flow, and what are we doing to drive business models that are profitable versus just trying to grow ourselves potentially out of issues. So big reset, it's kind of a back to basics moment. We've moved away from a cycle for the last 10 years of where it's all about top of funnel lead gen, and now really thinking about your brand, the experience you deliver, and ultimately how do you differentiate. So what do we mean by that? In terms of differentiation, what are you doing as a company that allows you to stand out from your peers? I just had a conversation this morning with one of the Advisory Network colleagues, sponsors here that works for a law firm. And the conversation quickly went to, well, if all law firms are saying the same thing and offering the same services, how do you differentiate, right? How do you drive, ultimately what a brand should do is drive efficiencies across your enterprise, across your business. So what do we mean by that? It's really the delineation of brand versus marketing. Brand is an asset. It's an asset that sits on your balance sheet and it's hidden inside goodwill. And when you align brand with strategy and with experience, and ultimately you're able to create a differentiated brand, it should drive efficiencies across your entire P&L and all the functions of your business. And how does that manifest itself? Number one, just growth, right? It should be more effective, more efficient to drive new customers or grow with existing customers. So we mentioned Apple and Nike right away. That's just brand efficiency. It's top of mind, but it's also, why do we care about Apple? Why are we willing to pay $700 more for this phone versus an Android phone when the reality is technologically they do the exact same thing? It's a $700 difference, and that's the efficiency that Apple's brand drives right now in the marketplace. And that's really what we're getting towards. It also can help you attract and retain top talent more effectively. If your brand is resonating with people, if it's differentiated, if it's communicated and positioned appropriately, you actually will attract and retain talent more effectively and more efficiently. And we have a tremendous number of examples where in this environment where everybody's saying, hey, it's really hard, the talent wars are real, we're having a hard time, hiring people, keeping people, we can point to companies that are actually hiring people at a very rapid clip. And a lot of it has to do with that company, how it's positioned, how it's disrupting business. You want to launch business, and we'll hear some about that, in new markets, new categories, which our friends from Zeramis will share with us. Brand has impact in terms of your ability, your efficiency in growing your business, expanding, launching new product, launching new service, entering new geographies. So that's really ultimately what John and I are getting to when we talk about brand, and we talk about differentiation is, how do you position yourself? What are those things you're going to do in your market that you can leverage and actually own that allow you to stand out against your competitors? And I think you'll find from the Zeramis story that they do a really fabulous job of differentiating within their market, but also owning what we'll ultimately get to is their superpower. So
awesome. You mentioned the word reputation too. I think when we think about brands and reputation, there's a story, right? There's a story in the market. So I think the conversation we want to have, and I'd like to start with Jim and Carol Sue, just kind of take us back to company origin story. When we talk about family businesses, family enterprise, the origin story is a huge part of how this kind of came into the market, and they really, I think, honor that story. So maybe, Carol Sue, if you want to kick us off, and maybe just a quick background on the company itself. What is Zeramis? Just define it for everybody, the type of work that you do, and then start at the beginning and kind of take us through, because the origin story is pretty fascinating from your father and where that has gone, and then we'll kind of get into some of the growth points and how you've leveraged that differentiation.
So Zeramis was founded by my parents, Peter and Loretta Bernardo, but you go back in history to, we are a pharmaceutical clinical packaging company based in Morristown, New Jersey. So the history going back is my father holds his PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry from the University of Michigan and worked in big pharma early part of his career. So started here in Philadelphia at SmithKline & French in the 70s and then moved through different pharmaceutical companies in New York and then in Chicago working for Baxter Travenol. In the mid to late 80s, he and my mother were talking. My father really wanted to open his own company. So they decided to do that. They coined a name called Cimarex, and they were originally going to go into generic drug manufacturing. And the name was coined after similar to the RX, Cimarex. However, at that point in time, and he was well networked and established in the pharmaceutical R&D world, and a colleague said to him, do you know clinical supplies is a new and growing market? Maybe you want to go into that instead. So they did. They kept the name, and they opened a pharmaceutical clinical packaging in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, back in 1988, and grew that company, focused strictly on clinical packaging, clinical supplies. And in 1996, because of the way the industry was going, it became advantageous to have a facility outside the U.S., so they opened a facility or a location in the U.K. outside of London. But they were quickly approached by CROs who were trying to be one-stop shop and were acquired. So after that, they decided, you know what, we really want it to be privately held. So they stayed on board, met their contractual obligations, and then in 2001, they founded Xeramis. They took their original name, Cimerex, flipped it, and we are Xeramis. Once again, focused strictly on clinical packaging and clinical supplies. Initially, they were just going to go in the realm of distribution-related activities, but clients found them and came back to them, and the business has grown over the past 22 years. So early on, instead of opening a facility in the UK, we partnered with companies, but then finally in 2015, we incorporated in the UK. We opened a facility in the UK, just outside of London, 30 miles west of Heathrow. And then the UK decided to leave the EU. And that was a big reason in our industry why you wanted to be over in Europe, because there are certain requirements and people you need to be working with to have clinical supplies released and available to clinical sites in Europe. So we had to come up with a new strategy or a solution to this new challenge we were facing. So in 2018, we incorporated in the Netherlands, and we applied for a license for what's called QP services. We obtained that license. And then we were waiting to see what the relationship was with the EU and the UK, and we ended up identifying a location and opening a third location, this time in Amsterdam. So we're in the process now of just finalizing that third facility. It's our second largest facility. We are a 3-location, 3-business company now. And excited about the future and growing it. So that's where we are right now. I happen to have come on board back in 2004. In terms of my own personal story, I think I am fortunate, and I think the same holds for Jim, that we pursued other careers outside the family business early part of our career. And I think that gave us breadth of experience, different experiences, that when we did come on board to work at the company, we could bring those experiences to what we had to offer. For me personally, I started from the ground up. That's kind of what everybody does at the company. So we provide not only distribution, but packaging and labeling of clinical supplies. It's a very manual task. It's not automated because we have multiple clients and everything is bespoke, if you will, very unique. And so I started working in a packaging room and labeling clinical supplies, and then just slowly took on more responsibility, took on more groups as I grew with the company to the point where now I am CEO and managing director for all 3 locations.
Thanks, Chris. So Jim, you...
Just real quick,
Yeah.
I think another good point to this, we actually built the facility during COVID. We actually never even saw the site until we hired a construction company, and we actually had to work with the consulate to get into the Netherlands, so we didn't have to quarantine 14 days. Because if we were to add 14 days to our construction process, we'd be over there for a month, and then having to come back to the United States and quarantine 14 days. So we were able to obtain, through the consulate, through the Netherlands, the ability to fly, which was the best flying I've ever done in my life because there was no one in airports and no one in customs and no one anywhere. Able to go and actually meet, and I was going once a month over during the entire COVID period. I actually got COVID when I was over there and I had to stay over there 14 days just because I couldn't get back into the United States because of their quarantine rules. So it was definitely a interesting situation that Carol Sue and I had to work through, and especially my construction team, because everyone that was on site had to be tested every single day to go inside the building. So there were a lot of challenges, and even on top of that was since the UK left the EU, a lot of companies were going to the Netherlands to set up their businesses due to the fact that a lot of the EMA and other financial parts were going to go ahead and establish themselves in Amsterdam. So a lot of these bigger companies were going over to do that, which created a dearth in electrical power. So we walked into the space not having enough power to power our facility. So then we had to come up with a solution to that. We had to bring in solar panels. So our entire facility at this point is solar powered with a secondary charge of local energy. So we had to come up with a lot of different strategies to deal with what was at hand. And this was during COVID. So we had to deal with supply chain issues. We had to deal with, one person in the building gets COVID, you shut down the building. If we had whole contractors that if they got COVID, they would shut down all their team members going in. So there was a lot of different moving parts to getting this business open, and I think really it strengthened what we come down to here is brand placement. We put our heart and soul into that business during a time where you couldn't really build anything, and when working with John, we really through LinkedIn and social media and our website were able to really talk about something no one could go see, and you couldn't fly there. Our clients couldn't fly there, and so on and so forth. So. That being probably one of the biggest challenges.
So, Jim, you and I have talked a lot over the years. Your function kind of on the strategy and business development side of growth. And Carol Sue mentioned the origin being, hey, there's an opportunity in this market. This is untapped, and Cimarex kind of inserts itself in there. Fast forward as that market evolves and gets really saturated. You've seen the growth of new players come in. So how and following the thread of what you just talked about, there's an adaptability that's born into the Zeramis ethos, right? You're nimble, you're hands-on, like your team is always involved. Talk to us about what happened when the market changed. Other players came in, and sort of where did you go?
Really what it came down to is we've always held, and Carol Sue can talk to it too, is we've always stand by what we do, and that's service, flexibility, reliability, quality, and we always stood behind those principles, and we never changed. We never wanted to be something we weren't. And a lot of our larger competitors were actually getting either tons of venture cap money and then buying manufacturing. So they really started diversifying their portfolio, going from clinical supplies into whether it's drug manufacturing or even drug development. So they were hitting all these different areas. And we are basically a clinical packaging organization, and they're considering a CDMO, which is what we are and what they used to be. So they really started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they haven't stopped. So they've been swallowing up smaller companies like ours for years now, and we get it every day. I know Carol Sue gets calls. I get calls every day from companies trying to say, you know what, we'll just take your business over. You can retire, and we're not ready to do that yet because we have such a great reputation within the business that we actually go up against their business on a daily basis.
Maybe that's an interesting segue, and I think hits at the heart of brand. You said something, Carol Sue, that was very interesting, which was sold the company, but you always wanted to be private. And I think that's something that potentially resonates with a lot of the other multi-gen and family-owned businesses here is, what is it, what's the value of being private? Why is that important to you, and how does that impact, how you drive strategy, but also deliver on behalf of your customers and your partners?
So being private is everything. If you want to be able to control things and if you want to be able to make changes and decisions, you know, in a way that will work not only for you, your customers, you can be a little bit more risk averse. So in terms of messaging and branding and where we've come and how we've grown as a company, and we've worked with John and his team for years now, and at each juncture, we had to look at, you know, where we were at, how we wanted to position ourselves and what our message was, or what we wanted, how we were evolving and how that message was changing over time. And we worked really closely with them to, if you will, continue to tell our clients our story and how we were growing and evolving over time, because the story has changed. Not our core values and not who we are and what we provide to clients, but what is your story as you grow as a company. So certainly when we first started working with John and we were just about to venture into our UK facility, we had to tell the story to our clients with the competition who viewed us, and other clients viewed us as a small company. They're just US based. They can't handle big studies, which we could, but the perception that we couldn't because we didn't have a location outside the US. So then we had to begin telling that story as we opened a facility in the UK. Hey, look, we are bigger. We can handle your bigger studies and that kind of thing. We've achieved that, but now we are in a position to want to emphasize the global aspect of us as a company and not just talk about the size of the projects we can work with. So again, the story is evolving. It's not changing anything about the core values foundation that we were built on and what we pride ourselves on delivering time after time to our clients, but yet we are constantly looking at what is the message, what is our story, how are we evolving over time, and how does that have to change so that we feel we are accurately portraying ourselves to our customers at large and to the competition. You know, part of it is obviously trying to let people who don't know about us, what are you about? You know, you click on a website and you get an instant feeling, and that's really important to me, that I don't want to just call it visual, but that impact. When you click on that website, you have an immediate sense of, do they know what they're doing? Do they look modern? Do they look like they've got all the services that we need and are looking for? And it's a very quick and visual snapshot, and that's a piece of it. It's also your competition who's looking at your website, and we look at their website, to be able to pick you apart and say, well, they don't have this because, and that kind of thing. So it does serve multi-purpose for us. And we're also in the process, because we're now in Europe, not only looking at the messaging to our US customers, but now looking at messaging and what is our brand to our European clients who we want to begin to grow. And again, that's a whole nother piece. I would say for us overall as a company with branding and working with my Whitepenny is we're always looking at the next step and what we need to do to evolve, which makes it fun and exciting to us in terms of what we do. And also the industry. Every industry changes and evolves. And if you don't constantly look at that and constantly think about change, not just for change's sake, but how it will improve the service you are providing and what your clients are looking for.
Yeah, there's an interesting thread there in the reinvention part. I think because we've been partners for so long, the early strategy that Carol Sue mentioned was people saw Zaramis as small. We had to compensate for that. We had to ensure that they looked capable enough to handle phase 3 global trials, right, to run that work. So everything was kind of helping them punch up in the market. Now, they are that, and they're seen as that, and we're actually having to sort of flip it around and say, we want to make sure they don't look like one of the big faceless Goliath companies now. They have to say, we're still privately held, hands-on. You can still talk to Carol Sue, like there's that direct access to this company.
I think the story doesn't change, but how we message ourselves as far as a family changes, because we were very much a family-oriented business on the website, and we're slowly getting away from that because that message has been there and done that. Now we're just a privately held company that can make decisions on a larger scale.
That's right.
I think that's a huge. We got out of that. Oh, we're a family-owned business to we're a global company, not a family-owned business.
So Jim, take that thread. So you mentioned, and I think every business is familiar with, like, there's always the David and Goliath in any industry, right? Especially family businesses deal with it. How do I compete against that big player? So you mentioned there are these large entities that have swallowed companies up, and you're competing against one arm of their business. How does Zeramis win in that? How are you able to say we can go against these juggernauts, but actually be competitive and take business away? What is it that's allowed you to do that? What conversation are you having when you're selling Zeramis in that conversation?
Well, I think there's a couple different strategies there, and I think everyone knows that COVID really put a hamper on how we're doing business, especially when people are not in the office anymore. I think that what we do as a company is a lot of the pharmaceuticals have not started going back to the office. Maybe they go at 25% because they're, as pharmaceutical companies are, very risk avert. They don't want people getting sick, and they don't want to be that cover story on New York Times saying that their whole company got COVID. So what from our strategy was, okay, so we're going to go see these people in their hometowns. So they can pick where they want to have lunch. They can, if it's a new customer, we'll go meet you at your favorite diner or up in Boston or San Francisco or wherever that should be. We're not looking to go to your facility. We could do a presentation in front of you. Teams is kind of, at this point, I think, crippled us a little bit. It makes it easier to have meetings internally from all three locations, but I think people want to get back out there and to have those things. And we were doing it as soon as we could do it. As soon as the client or a potential customer said, you know what, we're allowed to meet people now. And we were doing this day one. We flew to San Diego, San Francisco, Boston. My colleague was in Europe immediately, trying to make people comfortable with the current situation we're in. And I really think it's the relationship that we build really sells the company. Regardless if we're, let's say, more expensive, but they know they can come and have a conversation with. They have access, which most larger companies have bureaucracy, which we do not have. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I think part of what you're talking about in terms of we will do what it takes to reach out and talk to our clients, but also in terms of what you were asking, John, our competitors do have more bureaucracy. They're less flexible, they're less able and willing to adapt to what our clients need. Clinical supplies is fraught with change. If you don't like change, you don't go into our business because it changes all the time. So the question becomes, how quickly can you change with your clients? How quickly can you adapt? How quickly can you accommodate their unexpected challenges and things like that? And for us as a business, as we grow globally and get bigger, it is a challenge to still be flexible and nimble, but that is a value that we're committed to, and it's not just how we work with our clients, but it's also ensuring internally, not only at one company, but across 3 companies, we are working collaboratively, we are sharing ideas, we are flexible, we're supporting one another. So it's how we work with our clients is also how we work internally, and our ability to stay true to that value and then provide that to our clients, I do think differentiates us to bigger competitors, where you will find they have locations around the world, but for all intents and purposes, those locations are standalone businesses. Not that they're not part of the whole umbrella, but there's not as much a collaboration because they're just so big. And so size, in this case, the fact that we're not a behemoth, I think is an advantage in this situation to our clients.
It's organically grown too, where our competitors will just go buy a brick and mortar business and then just call it whatever it is. And where we're, self-funding our own movements, we're making sure that the business plan matches what we want to achieve. And I think that is what also differentiates us from our larger competitors is we put thought in the process of buying and building our location, just because we could have gone to any 27 EU countries. But we decided that Amsterdam made sense. Language, because now we're dealing with 3 different cultures. You got the US culture, you got UK, and now the Dutch, which are all extremely different. It's really important to have that collaboration when doing so, because what I may think is fine in a new client, they may disagree with that, or the UK may disagree with that. So we need to all collaborate on. We're constantly on calls about the next opportunity and how we're going to achieve their goals.
So, just talking about that too, and getting back to branding, it's how do you talk to different cultures and have your website or your message that you are still want to have out there, but speak to a different culture and that kind of thing.
We're right now in development with John and his team on 2 websites. So we have a US facing outward and an EU facing inward websites that we're developing currently, which will probably have, maybe the US won't have multiple languages, but the EU facing will. What are those languages? Do we need German, French, and Dutch? Do we need Italian? Do we, so we have to start looking at market research on what that is. And typically in the EU, they are very much country patriots. How do we break into that market share? So if they have a clinical supply company in their country, Germany is a great example. There's multiple. They typically will stay within that country. So now we got to break down boundaries and how we're going to do that. That's really what the collaboration between myself, Carol Sue, and Whitepenny has to do and come up with that functionality.
It's a really, I think, good and tangible example of as something has changed, right? The conversation that changed was saying, now we can't look like a company that is US based and sort of as an afterthought has locations in the EU. And part of that was saying there has to be a dedicated EU website that says we're here as a global company. We have separate digital properties now that match our physical properties. So I think that constant reevaluating of where you are and the things that have to change is super important. I'm interested in, as we think about your evolution, and your early work was a lot of smaller phase 1 trials. And I think what we've known from that work is that it's pretty intense, right? It's like there's a lot of hand-holding. It might be a first study, first trial. How are you moving someone through that process? Can you talk a little bit about how going through that door from predominantly phase 1 to phase 2 to now where you are, which is much more phase 3 global focused, why was that important to do that? How did that get you to where you are now? Because there were many companies through the years that said, we don't want that work. It's too small, it's annoying, we just want to be doing the phase 3. And I think it's positioned you. So it was paying the bills. I mean, we were working to we were fighting for everything. Because back in 2000, 10 and 11 and 12, we were just coming out of a recession. And, we were going after everything and anything. And the amount of work it took to do those phase 1s and phase 2s was monumental. I mean, it was a lot of hand-holding. They didn't know what they were doing. Imagine being a lawyer, but had to become a cook, too, at the same time, and not knowing how to be a cook. So we were telling them how to become that cook. And these are the steps you need to take in order to get your drug to the marketplace. We became their best friend because they had no clue what they were doing. And on top of that, they didn't have money to do it, because typically when you see a lot of these small biotech companies out of Boston, San Diego, it's one molecule with 3 people. And they're outsourcing absolutely everything. They basically have a Regis office at that point saying, we have this great idea, we need to outsource all this stuff. So we're part of that outsourced team. And I think really when we started making that transition from being that we're your small, clinical trial provider,
your phase ones. We're like, okay, we're getting bigger now. We actually have money coming in, and now we need to change our message. And that's when John came in, and we're saying, okay, we're bigger now. We're gonna open the UK, which was a big catalyst to us moving from that phase 1 to that phase 2, 3s.
But also, I would add that the phase 1, phase 2 helps solidify to clients out there that we were the people that they could count on to guide them and to show them the ropes, if you will. And they knew that we had their best interest at heart and wouldn't guide them in the wrong direction. So we helped solidify our reputation for knowing what we're doing, but really being partners with them and telling them the right thing to do, because it's not exactly straightforward, because there are always limitations on a variety of things, from drug availability or patients or something like that. So I think it helped solidify that we can trust them. And that's another thing, you can't just buy trust or anything. So it really reinforced the foundation and the reputation for being able to count on us, count on the people that work at Xeramis to tell us what to do and get us through that. But for us as a company, we wanted to grow beyond that. We needed to break through the barriers, because our competitors were out there saying they can't handle the bigger stuff. Just give them the phase 1, phase 2. So we had a lot of barriers to have to break down. But I think taking on those early projects, and we still don't disregard them, but spending all that time paid off in helping solidify the reputation and the brand.
It also created a customer base too, because the lifespan of a clinical supply manager at a pharmaceutical company is basically 2.5 years. So those people are changing companies constantly. So they had a great experience back in 2010, and now are head of mid-sized pharma companies that said, we're going with Xeramis because back in 2010 they were helping me develop a drug that never even made it through the FDA. But they did everything they possibly could to do it. So we were creating a customer base we still do. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't, but most of those people are now directors or vice presidents of clinical supply companies, pharmaceutical companies.
So piggybacking on that, our company, even back when my father and mother were running it, was, word of mouth. That was a big part of how people learned about us and reputation. Same thing now when we talk about, we built those customers, and what Jim says, people in the pharmaceutical clinical supplies world move companies to companies. And if they liked working with you, when they get to their next company, they say, let's work with Xeramis because I had a really good experience. However, people do get older. And so you end up you're going to have new people who don't know you and don't have that relationship, because we all, unfortunately, do get old. And so you're constantly marketing then to people who don't know you and have never heard about you because they're young. They're new in the industry. So you have to think about that too, I think, when you're creating your brand or your messaging and things like that. You can't just assume certain people now will know things.
Well, that's what we're doing right now too, is we also have to message to a new generation. And I may not know that voice or what that is right now. And that's why I got to rely on Travis and John to help me communicate that next generation of clinical supply managers. And also, great resignation of COVID put more consultants in our field than ever, because they quit their pharmaceutical job, created their own LLC, and are now doing consulting work as clinical supply manager for companies, because there's not enough clinical supply managers at this point in the United States to cover all these different areas. So, and really that's our next big focus, is how do you hire them too? So we need to it's got to go a couple different ways here. We got to be able to message to the 25 to 40-year-old crowd in their own voice, so I can actually hire them too. So not only do I need to tell them to use this as a company, but I need to also hire you too. And so that's really important in how the website is constructed, and really in the ease of use, because I don't know, my kids are, my son's 21 and he barely uses a computer anymore other than to write a paper. It's his phone only. So you got to think that way.
What we're hearing is we don't have to convince them that branding and marketing has really changed. 10, 15 years ago, we've mentioned websites several times. It was about getting in a room with founders and saying, okay, what do we want the market to know? What do we want our end users, our customers to know? What Jim and Carol Sue are talking about right now is really experiential branding and marketing. That is to say, Jim keeps saying, I've got to figure out what's inside the head of my end user, my potential employee, that person that's seeking information from me, and then how do I position a brand and messaging which resonates with them? What do they want to hear? What do they need to consume? How do they want to do it? And then provide those channels, those pathways, those transactions, that information, really. So it's less about Zaramis at that point and more about who's coming to us and for what. And I think it gets back to your origin story of the flexibility, this custom approach. I'm going to change tacks real quick. We got about 8 minutes to go in terms of until we move on to the next phase of the conversation. But everybody in the room is a family-owned business, multi-gen business, or part of the ecosystem. Maybe go back and talk a little bit about, I'm not sure everybody knows, Jim's a first-round draft pick, which is a term that the Delaware Valley family business community uses, which means he's an in-law. He was brought in. Maybe Carol Sue, go back to, just bring it back to family and how families impacted Zaramis and also how it infuses the brand and talk a little bit about working with each other as family members.
Go ahead.
Good or bad?
It's a little bit tricky because I think I was growing up, my parents were very, we sat around the table and had dinner together every night, and you heard what they were talking about and everything. And my parents, even when they started the company, we weren't part of it, but you heard and you were somehow integrated into it in terms of the thinking. I have to say, my mother and father, had great pride in what they did, but they were really committed to being a company of excellence and quality, but also taking care of their employees as well as their clients. So a real personal feel. I think I came on board because my mother needed me to, unbeknownst to any of us at the time. She was getting ill. She unfortunately passed away in 2010?
9.
Okay, 9. And it was that family feel. There was trust. I happened to be the one child in our family. I have a brother and a sister. My brother is out in California pursuing his own career in the film industry. My sister was married. They were living in California at the time, starting a family, and I was the most flexible individual and independent, so I came up from DC to be with them. But it's always been a very collaborative, sharing, all for one for all kind of family and company. And then I think shortly after my mother passed away, and Jim and Allie were living now in the Philadelphia area, and it was, talking to him about the possibility of coming on board and bringing his talents and his experiences. And I think as a company, from a family perspective, I think we also, at least I know, I try to look at the different strengths and talents people can bring to the table. We all aren't everything, and it's about bringing in unique talent to address multiple things that need to be addressed when you're trying to run a successful company. I think we still have that feel, and it sounds simple, but to a certain degree, I don't think I know how to be any other way. What I can tell you personally In my previous careers, I've never, ever been somebody who liked to work for big bureaucracies. I was fortunate when I was in college. My father was able to let me work at Baxter Tramadol, and I worked there for 4 summers, so I had that corporate pharmaceutical experience. But once I was out on my own, I always worked either independently in private practice or small companies and liked that autonomy. But, you know, with that is you have to be willing to make mistakes and make decisions and things like that. So
I also think that we're able to disagree and have a conversation. We travel probably half our time together. So we're going to Milan in 3 weeks together. So we travel well, we work well together, but we also have hard conversations. Sometimes they're heated, sometimes they're not. But at the end of the day, we'll end up going to the shore together for the weekend. So it's like you don't escape those situations, especially with family, especially when you have a shore home or your family obligations together. So we make things, I mean, it works very easy. We're very easy together. We're both Virgos too on top of it. So we work very well together, but we're also able to have those tough conversations, whether it's, whether I disagree with her or she disagrees with me, or I disagree with how the direction the company's going, which is not very often, but you have to be able to have those conversations as a family. Otherwise, you can't just have one voice, her voice going out. You need to be able to have those tough conversations with a family. I mean, it's, on top of that, my father-in-law is still alive too. He's 85 years old. I don't necessarily try to have conversations about the business, but I know Carol Sue probably has to have those tough conversations about the business that I don't have to have, which.
Jim, maybe we've heard some different things mentioned about backgrounds, and Carol Sue just let us in a little bit. 1 minute on your professional background, because I think it informs how you go about business and how you two collaborate on building the brand that is Zaramus.
So I was born and raised in San Francisco. I'll give you the 2-minute version. Went to University of Nevada, Reno, didn't like it. I'm not a college guy. And then I decided, hey, what am I going to do? So I went to the California Culinary Academy in 1996, became a chef, worked through the streets of San Francisco, opened some met Allie, Carol Sue's sister. We had our first son out there, William, who's now a junior at the University of Alabama, and opened some restaurants there. We decided to move back to Philadelphia because that's where our parents were. My father had passed away in 2001, so it was kind of making sense my mom wanted to move south with my brother. So I'm like, okay, we have no ties anymore, so let's do it. So we moved to Philadelphia. I got recruited by Steven Starr. I opened Jones Restaurant in 2002. Then I opened Barclay Prime, Butcher and Singer, Park. I helped open the Continental Midtown. I opened 2 hotels for him, one in Atlantic City, one at the W Fort Lauderdale. I was definitely part of the hospitality side of everything, so I understood service, controls, and on top of it, my mother-in-law would ask me for my P&Ls of all my restaurants so she could see how profitable I was. And no lie. So at the end of the day, I brought a sense of, and I got to work with, Steven, number one, who is, he took me on, he mentored me. Also a guy named Alan Dahm, who's up for mayor right now, who mentored me for many, many years. I would travel with him. He would teach me how to look at a real estate or just a business opportunity, what he looks into it, and strategy along those lines. And so I was very lucky with the mentorship I had at Steven, and I was slowly able to bring it into Zaramus. But I did the exact same thing, Carol Sue. I started at the very beginning, worked my way through the business to understand every aspect of it. And it's taken a long time because it's a very complex business.
And we're still learning.
And we're still learning. You're never an expert.
And I think what's fascinating to look at is, Carol, so you mentioned it a few minutes ago. You said to your parents, this was very personal, right? You tell the story of your parents all the time, and I think when we think about family-owned businesses, that, like, the company value set tracks back to the family value set, and they're so intertwined. And I think what's been incredible is you've managed to scale that now globally. Like you've said, this is what we're about. It is service-focused, it is agile, it is personal, and you haven't lost it in a global brand now, and that's, I think, admirable, and I think a really fascinating and interesting lesson for all of us to say, like, that you were able to do that. So Travis, maybe I think we're out of time. Do you want to sort of wrap on like what's the takeaway here as you think about?
I mean, it gets us this concept of superpower. What is your superpower, whether it's personal or as a company? And John and I are huge believers that sound business strategy tracks back to, number one, how you differentiate. Well, how do you decide how you differentiate? It's really identifying, that thing. And there's no other better word than that thing, because it can be almost anything that your company has developed, mastered, built, discovered, knows, that other companies that you compete against find it almost impossible to replicate, buy, recreate. And then leaning into that thing, which we'd call your superpower, because thing sounds like a pretty generic word, and really running your business strategy and your brand strategy constantly through that filter. If we had more time, I would have asked one of the questions I wanted to ask was, tell me something you didn't do or a decision you said, no, we're going to pull away from that because it doesn't go back to words you've used, Carol Sue, our core, flexibility, serving our customer. Jim, experience-based, right? Understanding that as a chef, what you put on the table, it's yours, and it's going to be judged immediately. And understanding that when you are a chef, it is about experience. And ultimately, John and I would argue, your brand is not the asset. It's not the logo. It's not even the website. It is the experience you deliver to your customer. It's the experience you deliver to your employee. It's the experience you deliver to your partners, even your community, right? Those experiences combine to form your brand position, your brand strategy. Your ability to then wrap that in all the assets, such as logo, tagline, website, helps communicate that experience. It helps, going back to what Carol Sue said very astutely was, she gets on a website and she makes a decision very quickly, 3 to 5 seconds. Is this the experience I expected based on what I heard? Or is this creating an issue for me? Is it a roadblock? John and I would call it friction. Is this friction? I heard you were, globally competent, yet highly, accessible. Are you emoting that? Are you providing that experience? Or if somebody picks up the phone and says, we can't get to you. You told me you're highly accessible, highly nimble, but I keep hearing, well, you have to deal with our box the way we want it done. We haven't heard any of that from them. But what we've heard through the conversation continuously is how being private and family owned is everything. Because being private and family owned allows them to make the decisions that are right for the company, that are right for the long term. Doesn't mean they're not going to compete on a global scale. Doesn't mean they don't compete against the most sophisticated. But they use nimbleness. They use the fact that they started in phase one because they had to basically build capabilities, build a business model, build a brand strategy that allows them, as their customers get bigger, as their competitors get bigger and bigger and bigger and more boxed into bureaucracy, to outmaneuver them. But at the same time, understanding that they are competing on a global level and therefore have to project that image. But at the same time, Jim saying, hey, but we got to continue to remember that if we're moving into Germany or Spain, those are, while it might be the EU, those are two different companies, two different countries with two different cultures, and we have to understand their experience and help message to them and reflect to them. So when we talk about superpower, that's really what we're talking about is, as a company, as a family, how do you really sort of peel it all back, look at all the building block layers of who you are as a company, why you're successful, and how you lean into that thing that differentiates you.
Thank you, Travis, Jim, Carol Sue, and John. We are going to take a break till 9:45. Then we're going to come back for some Q&A and some more table talk and some more conversation and instruction, direction. So thank you, everyone. There's food out here.